Hi, I'm Greg Smithies, and I'm the co-head of climate investing at Fifthwall. So 2023 was quite a year, ups and downs, a couple of good things that really were fantastic for the climate, but with the good comes the bad. I'm also going to be covering a couple of the tougher, more difficult things that happened during the year. First off, coming strong out of the gates from COP28, the big United Nations climate summit, is the fact that they announced a global loss and damage fund and that it's actually coming together. What is this? This is a fund put together by sort of Western nations, the first world countries, in order to pay for the loss and damage that climate change is inevitably going to have on many of the other countries in the world. If someone has to move their house in Kenya because climate change is threatening it, who pays for that, right? The loss and damage fund is designed to do that. So last year we had sort of rumors that it was getting set up. One or two countries put in, tens of millions of dollars. We came hot out the gates with dozens of countries signing up for it this year, hundreds of millions of dollars into it. Moving on, we had some discoveries of geologic hydrogen, big announcements in France, in the US, and Japan. Geologic hydrogen is hydrogen that is naturally occurring inside the Earth's crust, the same way you would find oil or gas by just drilling down. They have found hydrogen in the Earth. Okay, so why is this important? This is important because when hydrogen burns, it burns clean. The only thing that comes out of it is water vapor. You're not getting any CO2 emissions out of it. You're not getting any particulates, all of the really bad things that come out of burning fossil fuels. But you can use it almost like for like in many of the other processes that we currently burn natural gas or oil or coal for. What this could be, this finding of hydrogen inside the Earth's crust, might be a way for us to get tons and tons and tons of clean fuel that will allow us to decarbonize these difficult to decarbonize industries much faster than we ever thought we could. Talking also about hydrogen, we saw the Biden administration announce $7 billion of hydrogen hubs across the United States. What are these things? So think of if the world is going to move from an oil and gas run economy to a hydrogen run economy, you need a lot of the sort of infrastructure in place that the oil and gas industry has built up over the last 100-ish years. So think pipelines, depots, places to fill tankers and tanker trucks, things like that. So here's $7 billion from the Biden administration to go into setting up that sort of infrastructure around the United States. Moving on, very excited about the growth of electric vehicle sales. We actually saw 20% of the sales of all vehicles in California were electric this year. This year, actually, we also just went over 1 million EVs sold in the United States for the first time. So what's happening here to EV sales is they're doing an exponential growth curve, and humans are very bad at understanding exponential growth curves because they look flat to us and then they look like a cliff. We are getting into the cliff part of that growth curve here. It's very exciting, and the only reason why you're seeing those news reports of people cutting back is because they were overestimating how fast we would turn the cliff. The point is we are actually turning into that cliff point here, and it's very exciting. And then on to some maybe boring things around tax credits and imposition of tax duties. The EU implemented the world's first mass carbon border tax. Why is this important? If you are going to ask your companies to decarbonize their products, like you're going to tell people in Luxembourg that they need to make clean steel, then those companies are going to complain because, for example, that, hey, you're making me non-competitive with, for example, the Chinese steel that's coming into Europe, because that Chinese steel gets to be made with very dirty coal. What the carbon border tax regime does is it puts a tax at the border that tries to equalize these things. So if I'm forcing my European companies to make clean products, any dirty products that come into the European Union get whacked with a tax to sort of equalize those costs there. This is the first time we've seen a trading bloc like this put something like this in place. We're very excited that it's there because this is the way that we ultimately will probably get the rest of the world to focus on cleaning up their products, even if someone like the EU with their regulatory regime can't directly impact that Chinese company. This is a way that they can indirectly. And just to wrap it out on the good stuff of the California and Texas grids didn't fall over this year. But if we go back to 2021, 2022, we had these wild fluctuations in temperatures, and that led in California at the end of summer to the grid falling over because we got so many renewables on the grid. But then when people start cranking up their ACs, put a whole bunch of strain on the grid. California grid fell over a couple of times in 2021 and 2022. And then in Texas, we had that big freeze, right? It was sort of a snap cold out of nowhere, froze a whole bunch of different pieces of the grid, and the grid there fell over. Very worrying, and we saw a lot of people saying, hey, this is because you've got so many renewables on the grid, and therefore, renewables are bad. What is great is in 2023, we had even more renewables on both of these grids. We had roughly the same amount of crazy weather situations, and neither of these grids fell over. So we are getting better at controlling these very complicated renewable heavy grids. But with the good comes the bad. So let's talk about just a couple of tough things that happened this year. Renewable energy was the switch in California from net metering standard 2 to net metering standard 3, or you might have heard it described as NEM 2 to NEM 3. Basically, they changed the amount of money they were paying people if their solar panels on the roof of their house were pumping electricity back into the grid, at the height of summer. Massively made it a worse deal to put solar on your roof in California. Anywhere from a 65 to 85% drop in the total sales of rooftop solar in California. That is painful, whether it's 65 or 85. The flip side, though, is it did very strongly change the economics of owning a battery on your house, because a battery can then take the power that you made during the sunny part of the day and time shift it over into the night. And so what the California grid said is, we're going to pay you way more for electricity in the night than we are in the middle of the day. And so whilst, yes, it did cram down the total amount rooftop solar being sold, what it did also do was massively increase the number of systems being sold with a battery attached to them. So some bad, some good, but overall I think we saw a lot of negative headlines on this. Next up is we saw a lot of negativity this year around the carbon offset markets. We've really swung a full pendulum swing over where 2-3 years ago, a lot of people were saying, hey, the carbon offset markets are going to be the savior of many of these difficult to decarbonize industries, where yes, they're going to try and decarbonize themselves, but for that part that they can't decarbonize because the technology doesn't exist, they can buy carbon offsets, say by planting trees or protecting some forests in the Amazon, things like that. What happened towards the end of 2022 and then over into 2023 is we saw some massive indictments and expose type stories about the quality of the offsets going on here, that many of them really weren't backable, really weren't actually saving the planet or truly sequestering any CO2. And so the entire market really swung to the other side of saying, hey, carbon offsets are really not very valuable at all. We saw this in the prices of the offsets and in the number of people, Fortune 500 companies who are buying significant amounts of it. The right answer here isn't that carbon offsets are the panacea. It's also not that they are useless, right? So where we do need to get to is a happy medium. The pendulum's going to swing back and forth a couple of times before we hopefully meet in the middle where it should be. And then final big bad news that we saw this year is the coming impending sort of bloodbath that is going to be the climate impacts on large industries like real estate. We saw in California 3 insurers leaving the state and just refusing to insure homeowners in California. That was because of wildfire risk. In Florida, we saw 2 large insurers leaving, and there it's because of hurricane risk, right? And I think we're probably going to see a lot more of these sorts of insurers leaving different states for different climate-related reasons until the regulations are changed and these insurers are allowed to use different forward-looking models, better actuarial data, things like that. Currently, regulatorily, they are not allowed to use. So this, I think, is the first part of an ongoing trend we're going to see accelerate probably into 2024. So that's it for 2023. Either way, very excited for 2024 and to see what we can do there.